Hello, my name is Kaisa Long, and this is my presentation called More Alike Than One Would Think, an exploration of female agency and incidents in the life of a slave girl by Harriet Jacobs, and impressions of an Indian childhood by Zakala Sa. Now, a word about these two people. If you have not heard of these people before, these are two historical figures. Both were born in the 19th century, and one even lived their whole life in the 19th century. Both of these women are women of color, as you can see, and both lived a very tough life trying to find agency in a system implemented in the United States that was not made in their favor as women of color. Furthermore, the biggest similarity that these two have that really set them apart from any other historical figure in this time period is that they were able to display their agency through activism, sure, but most importantly, through a means of memoir. Both of them were able to write successful memoirs that we read even today and that we can study today that give us insight into what life was like for them. Before I say anything else, let's dive in. First, I want to talk about Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs was born in 1813, the 19th century, in the southern United States. She was a black woman and she was born into slavery. Now, she was heavily abused by her master, and when she realized that her master really just wanted her for abuse, especially sexual abuse, she was able to find a means of escape. She lived in the rafters or the crawl hole of her grandmother's shed for 7 years under her master's nose. Pretty impressive. After 7 years, she was able to make an escape to the north. She found a lot of hardship escaping to the north and living in the north without being found out, but she was able to do it. She went on to become an activist for African American rights, and she even wrote her memoir, as mentioned here, all before she died in 1897. That said, I want to talk a little bit about the ways that she was able to obtain agency, even during her really horrible situation. Um, like I said, she spent 7 years in a tiny crawl space above her grandmother's shed, and she tells about it in her memoir. And eventually, she's able to escape to the north, where she realizes that even in the north, there are people who are racist and systems put into place that are not meant um, to favor her. Most importantly, though, I do want to talk about an article by Michelle Burnham, who really goes over some agency that she has or does not have, as she mentions in her memoir. For example, um, when she is in the crawl space, she is able to kind of change her perspective of from being under her master's gaze to being able to see her master. Now, before she escapes, she is under her master's gaze and it's very uncomfortable for her. It does not allow her for agency, and she realizes she's going to lose agency of her body very quickly. And so that is the reason why she escapes. Through her escape through the crawl space, she is able to have a peeping hole, and she turns the whole narrative on its head, and suddenly she's the one peeping on him rather than him peeping on her. And so in that way, she's able to gain a little bit of agency. Furthermore, it's important to mention that the loophole itself, the crawl space, allows her agency. Even though she's confined to this tiny space for 7 years, even just that space allows her a little bit of empowerment, a little bit of agency. She's able to spend that time how she wants, say what she wants, and figure out a way to escape, which she does eventually. Now, Sa is similar but different. She was born in 1876, so again, a woman born in the 19th century, a woman of color. She was born and raised on a reservation in South Dakota as a Native American, and as a teen, she wanted to leave her reservation and go to school. Now, her mother most likely knew what that would mean for her, but she didn't. And so her mother very reluctantly let her go to school, but Sa quickly realized her mistake. The school she was going to go to was under a very white male, patriarchal, Christian society that was going to try to take the Native American out of her and replace it with white culture and ways. So that said, she was able to rebel in small ways at her school. She eventually worked her way up the system. Over the years, she was able to graduate from the school and then work her way up the system. She eventually advocated for Native rights and spent a lot of her adult life doing so until she died in 1938. Something that I would like to point out is, like I said, she rebelled in school in very small ways. She was able to find a little bit of agency. For example, in one instance, she found out that she couldn't wear her moccasins, so she ran away, put her moccasins on instead of the white people shoes that she had to wear. And for a long time, she hid from everyone. She says in that instance that that was a moment when she lost her spirit. Another instance would be that she was preparing dinner for the people at her school, and she was supposed to prepare turnips. She really hated turnips, so she mashes the turnips so much that it was not able to be eaten. And so she has that little win where no one can eat her turnips, and so she doesn't have to eat them. Now, most importantly, in her adult life, it's important that we talk about the agency that she was able to seek for herself and for her Native American peoples. Author Foley says in her article that Saw was able to eventually become an orator, a teacher, a community organizer. And in all these ways, she was able to obtain agency from within the system that was not meant for her to have a place at the table or rise up and or to allow her to have any sort of agency. So she was able to use those sorts of opportunities to obtain agency eventually. But she doesn't just attain agency for herself, she tries to obtain agency for her people. For example, Foley talks a lot about how Native Americans just don't have agency in terms of their own government, especially when it comes to owning land. And land is a very important thing for Native Americans. It was their land first anyway. And so Foley points out that she also really strived to have agency for her people in government and in owning land. Now, that's also true for having agency in the classroom. She eventually became a teacher, and she was able to kind of point out and vocalize that school was really just kind of like this system, this mechanized thing that did not allow for a more natural education or an education of one's land, which was really important for her as a Native American. And so, in this way, she is able to kind of grow as an adult and gain agency for her and for her people. Now, like I said, these are two pretty different women. They're both women of color. They lived about the same time, and they both really struggled, or for at least a little while, under the watchful eye of systematic racism. Systems in the United States that were meant to keep them quiet and lacking agency. But incredibly, they both were eventually able to achieve agency for themselves and work on gaining agency for their people. They both became activists for their groups, Saw for Native Americans, Jacobs for African Americans. And so they became activists, tried to gain agency for themselves and for their people. But most importantly, what sets them apart from other people of that time period, other women, is that they use memoirs successfully to write about their experience. And I think we all know that writing is an important mean of agency, being able to put your own words on the page, being able to give your own experience without anyone else trying to cover it up or change it or manipulate it in any way. So, what's so spectacular is that they were able to achieve that agency. And, like I said before, these memoirs are still read today, still taught today, still used and analyzed and looked at today. And for that reason, they were hugely successful as opposed to other women of their time. And I think that is just incredible. Now, I wanted to add a little bit more, take it one step further and say, you know what now? It's great that these two women are so incredible and were able to achieve agency. But I think it's important also to recognize that things haven't changed that much for Native Americans and for Black women. right? We still have these systems created in our country that are meant to keep these women poor and powerless. And some ways that we can rectify that, I added some links. One for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, a great organization that you can donate to allow Indigenous women more agency, more freedom, and just a better life in general. I also added a link to the Black Lives Matter movement that you can also donate to, which, if you don't already know, is a movement meant to give Black people as a whole, especially Black women, a mean of agency. And I would kind of like to leave us on this note that until we can better our systems, we should keep in mind that if these women can achieve agency against all odds, so can we, right? The system that Jacobs and Saw had to fight against, had to overcome, is is on a completely different level than what we're dealing with today, but still we have these systems, and still we can find ways to achieve agency, especially through writing and writing memoirs and sharing our experiences, and that is the most important thing we can do as people. Lastly, I would like to just point out some of my sources that I use for this presentation, and I would like to say thank you for listening, and thank you for considering my topic.